Hi there, I'm Lelia Lewis, and welcome to another edition of New Day, New Beginnings. Now, today's lesson is titled One Rotten Apple Can Spoil the Whole Bunch or Barrel. You know what? And that's true with any fruit. It could be strawberries, grapes, blueberries, blackberries, peaches, plums, because and veggies as well. And all it takes is one bad piece of fruit, one bad apple to touch another apple, to touch the other berries. And what to do? It creates a chain reaction. And you know what? The sad part about that is the same thing is true with people. Now, I was looking at the story of Jesus a few days back. And Judas Iscariot, he was trying to get Jesus to come and meet with the priests and the Pharisees and all that, trying to make him understand. They just want to get to know you. They want to understand the way you're thinking. And Judas was saying to Jesus, I have an open mind. In other words, I'm willing to listen to what they have to say. But Jesus said, open your heart, open your eyes, not your mind. In other words, Jesus is saying, look beyond what you see, beyond the surface. Because Jesus already knew they wanted to kill him. He already knew what was in their mind. But Judas thought they wanted to befriend him and learn his ways. But in actuality, they were just looking for a justified reason to kill him. And in the Bible story, the rotten apples were the priests and the Pharisees. Because what? They were trying to turn all the people and even the king against Jesus. So they became the rotten apples. And in today's lesson, we're going to see how one rotten apple can spoil a whole town. And yeah, it's in North Fork. It takes place in North Fork. Lucas and Mark, they're in their wagon and they're on their way to town to get their supplies like they usually do. But in a distance, they see another wagon over there, but it's a covered wagon, not an open wagon that you put supplies in. And they were like, well, that means they must be strangers, settlers coming in. So they went over just to see because they didn't see anybody about or around the wagon. They went over and they started calling out, hello, hello, is anybody here? No answer. So Lucas climbs down and he goes to the back and he looks in their wagon and he sees a young couple in there. Now, the man, he was totally unconscious, but the woman, she was kind of semi delirious, and he got in and she had a very high fever. And so Lucas sent Mark in their wagon. He said, you go to town and get the doctor. I'll drive their wagon and take them back to our house, and you bring the doctor to our house. But on his way, Lucas taking their wagon back to his house on the road, he met one of his neighbors. And he said, well, to Lucas, he said, well, what are you doing with that covered wagon? Because, he knew it wasn't his. And Lucas said, well, the people back here are sick, and I'm taking them to my house, but I sent Mark to town to get the doctor. So in the interim, so Lucas is taking them to his house, then he lays them down and he covers them with blankets, and then he begins applying cold compresses to their foreheads and trying to break that fever or at least lower it. So, long story short, fast forward, the doctor gets there and he checks him out and everything like that. But he realized they had yellow fever. Now, yellow fever back then was a horrific thing because they didn't really have a cure for it, or they didn't really know what to do. And all they could do was do what he was doing, try to get the fever broken and so forth and so on. But it was so easily spread. And that's why they had yellow fever epidemics. And that's why those people had to be quarantined because it's easily spread, it's easily contracted, it's highly contagious. You could get it just by being around them, touching what they were touching or breathing that air, and it is extremely deadly. So they're now quarantined. The doctor said they got to be quarantined. They got to have to stay here. So that meant Mark had to go away from the house. So Lucas was sending him to town. He said, "You go in town and stay with Miss Hattie until this is over." So he goes to town with the doctor. The doctor takes him back and takes him over to Miss Hattie's store. And so Mark goes in the store. Now, that same man that met Lucas on the road, he saw the doctor and he said, "Oh, Doc, how's those people that are out there at Lucas's house?" And Doc knew he couldn't say anything about the yellow fever. So he just simply said, "Oh, yeah, they're just sick. That's all." But meanwhile, Mark is in the store with Miss Hattie. So she was taking care of another customer. And so Mr. Bass, the guy that was outside talking to the doctor, he came in and he approached Mark. And he said, "Oh, hello there, Mark. What are you doing in town?" And he said, "Oh, I'm staying the night with Miss Hattie." And he says, "Oh, yeah, because of those settlers, huh? Doc was just telling me about them. He said they were pretty sick." And Mark, being a kid, he's like, "Oh, yeah, but Pa's taking good care of them." But that's kind of chancy. Now, while he's talking to Mr. Bass, there's a man standing at the other end of the counter, but he's listening very intently to what's being said. So he says, "Yeah," Mark's still telling Mr. Bass. He said, "Yeah, Doc said yellow fever is really catchy too. But my pa don't care." Now Mr. Bass is getting nervous and he said, "You mean he took them in? You mean he let them stay there?" And Mark's like, "Oh, sure." Now Bass is getting upset. He said, "Oh, that fool, that stupid fool." Now he's going to Miss Hattie. "Miss Hattie, did you hear that McCain's keeping those people with yellow fever at his house?" And now she's cool and calm. And she's like, "Well, I guess there's not too much we can do about that now, is there?" He says, "Well, you know what'll happen. It'll spread and we'll all get down with it." I don't think it's that bad," she says. Now he's mad at her. He says, "Oh, you don't, huh? Well, you're as stupid as McCain is." Now he's mad. He turns and walks out the store. So she turns back to her customer, the lady, Miss Crawford, and she says to her, she says, "Boy, these men really get riled up over nothing, don't they?" Now the ladies get, "Well, yellow fever can be dangerous." Now she's supposed to be looking at the material. Now all of a sudden she's like, "Well, okay, well, you know what? I really can't make up my mind about which one of these I want right now. So I'll just come back tomorrow." And she done hurried on out the store because she heard about the yellow fever. So the man who was standing at the other end of the counter, now his name was Britt. Now he gone. He left when he heard the word yellow fever. But where was he going? He's going to McCain's ranch because he want to see where the wagon is, where the people are. So he's trying to look in. The wagon was outside, of course. So he trying to sneak up and look in the wagon and see. I don't know what he was looking for. But anyway, Lucas saw him and he came out and he said, are you looking for something, Britt? Oh no, no. I was just looking for a job. So if you're looking for a ranch hand, I'm here. And Lucas said, a job? He said, you had a dozen jobs since you came out the army. You done work for everybody within 50 miles of here. Well, he must have been a terrible worker or something. So now Britt's getting a little bit annoyed. And he said, look, I'm not looking for no lecture, just a job. And Lucas said, no, once was enough for me. So, he must have been a very poor worker. So now Britt's getting mad at him. And he says, yeah. You're just like all the rest of them, aren't you? When a man goes off to war, he's a real hero. But when he comes back, he's just dirt. And Lucas says, the war's been over for years. I mean, when are you going to forget about it? And he says, well, I had a lot of experience in the war with yellow fever. And Lucas, how'd you hear about that? And he said, oh, word gets around. How bad are they? And Lucas says, well, they're not so bad that I can't handle it alone. So Britt says, yeah, but can you handle the folks in town alone too? They're getting pretty skittish about this catching the fever. But now, see, I can gentle them down, or I could spook them real good. Now, it's almost like he's saying, well, I can help you out. I can either calm them down or make them more scared than they already are. And so Lucas says, so what's going to make you decide? And he said, well, I'm kind of tired of Norfolk and I wanted to get out of here, but I need a stake. So Lucas said, well, work for it. Lucas said, you're trying to trade off sickness to cash in on fear. In other words, if you give me a few dollars, I'll calm them down and, do whatever you want me to do. But Britt got mad because he said, yeah, you're trying to trade off sickness on fear. Then Britt says, oh, don't get all high and mighty with me. So Lucas is now mad and tired of him. He said, just mount up and mount up now. So he did. He said, that's all right. I'll see you, McCain. I'll see you real soon. Now he goes back to town and now he got the attention of the townspeople because he went into the saloon and got all the men all hyped up. And, Micah, the sheriff, he sees and hears, because he's at the door, he hears them telling them all about, the yellow fever and how they were all going to be burned in their homes and everything's got to be burned. And the guys are saying, you mean there's nothing else they can do? And he said, no, that's the only way to stop it. It turns into an epidemic and you got to make it go away. Take my word for it. The fever spreads like a prairie fire, which it does, but because it's so highly contagious. And once it takes hold, I mean, there ain't nothing you can do. You can't stop it. And if you let McCain keep them people at his house, one of your families is going to come down with it. And then what? So you better do something about it now. Now, just then, Micah just barges in, and he says, like what, Britt? Just what is it you think they should do about it? And then Mr. Bass, he's going to step in. Well, you're the marshal, Micah. It's up to you. So Micah said, well, you can't expect me to turn sick people out. And Mr. Bass says, well, we expect you to protect us. Now Britt here, he's back again. And if you don't, Marshall, we got a right to protect ourselves. And he looks at him with this smirk on his face, like, and you know what that means, you know. But now Micah's just looking at him with this disapproving glare, you know. So he just looks him up and down like, yeah, whatever. So later the next morning, Mark is coming back to Miss Hattie's store with his school books. And she's like, Mark, what are you doing here? Why aren't you in school? And he simply said, well, the teacher, she sent me back. Well, you're not sick, are you? And Mark said, no, I'm not sick. But she was afraid I'll make everybody sick because of some sort of fever or something. So Miss Hattie, she said, oh, that's so much foolishness. She says, well, now you just turn around and you go right. And just then she was getting ready to send them back to school. But then Lucas comes in the store. So Mark, oh, hi, Pa, how are those folks? And he says, well, she's doing pretty well. And I think his fever is about to break. So he said, I just came, Hattie, I need some nourishment, like some of your good soup stock and getting some supplies for them. And then he looked over and wait a minute, what are you doing here? Why aren't you in school? Did you play hooky or something? And Mark's like, no, nothing like that. The teacher sent me back. She said I'd make the other kids sick. And Lucas is like, that's downright foolish. So Miss Hattie said, yeah, well, it seems like the whole town is foolish. Yeah, they're scared half out of their wits now. Doc said he was up all night with folks calling and complaining about coughs and sniffles and stomach pain. Well, Lucas said, I hope there's no danger. And she points to her head and she says, well, here's where the danger is. And that can be more serious than the fever. So Lucas takes the supplies and he's heading back to the door, and in comes Micah. Oh, hey, Micah, how you doing? And Micah just turns and points outside. He points to the crowd of men across the street in front of the saloon. And he says, they are scared to death. So they're walking outside. Lucas getting ready to get on his horse and go back. And now the crowd of men are walking from across the street to Lucas. And they're led by, you know who, Mr. Bass and Britt. Troublemakers, bad apples. Okay, Britt says, you need to get out of North Fork and stay out. And Mr. Bass says, you shouldn't have come here, Lucas. You're exposing all of us to the fever. And Lucas said, well, you better leave that to the doctor. And Britt says, well, you were around him. That's enough. So Lucas said, yeah, you're pretty much an authority, aren't you, Britt? Now he steps up and he's like, yeah, well, I am more than anybody around here. I saw enough of that during the war. And Lucas cut him off. During the war. Well, this isn't a war and you're not in the army. Mr. Bass, well, Micah, we told you last night if you didn't do something. And Micah said, I do as I see fit. And right now I see fit for you to break it up. All of you. So as Lucas rides off, the crowd, they kind of like turn away like they're heading back for the bar, I guess. And Micah says to Miss Hattie, he said, just one little push, Hattie, one little spark, and they're going to explode. And Hattie said, yeah, and they're supposed to be friends and neighbors. And just then a lady rides up in her wagon and she asked the marshal, have you seen the doctor? And Micah said, well, he's probably making his rounds. And she says, and Hattie was asking her, well, is anything wrong, Mrs. Crawford? And she says, My boy, he was sent home from school. He was feverish and sick at the stomach. Now, the men that were standing in the street are hearing this conversation. And Micah says, well, maybe it was something he ate. Now, she's the same lady that was in the store yesterday looking at the material when Mark was talking to Mr. Bass. So when Micah said, maybe it's something he ate, she's like, I don't think so. He said he was playing with Mark McCain before the classes started. And then Britt turned around and he said, see, I warned you about him coming to town. Now, how many more have to go and get the fever before it's over? And Micah says, now hold on a minute, Britt, just hold on. He says, no, you stay out of this, Marshall. You wouldn't do anything when we asked you before. So now we're going to handle it ourselves. And we're going to handle it in our own way. Now, meanwhile, back at the ranch, the couple is sitting up, they're feeling better, and they're getting something to eat. So as they're eating, they hear someone riding up. So Lucas, he opens the door, but it was Micah. And he said, oh, Micah, hi, what are you doing here? But Micah said, I came to warn you. They're coming, Lucas. I can't stop them. That mob went crazy when they heard the Crawford boy was sick. They just automatically assumed he had yellow fever. And Lucas said, well, was it the fever? And he said, well, they don't even know. They didn't even wait to find out. So now they're so hung up in what Britt and Bass are saying, they're just assuming. So they didn't wait to find out. Now here they come, all the men in this big wagon. They riding up to Lucas's house, and they get out. And Lucas looks out the window and he's like, uh-oh, they're walking up to his porch. And Lucas just reached over and grabbed his rifle and headed for the front door. And Micah's like, now remember, Lucas, they're your neighbors. You've been knowing them a long time. And Lucas just said, no, Micah, I don't know them at all. Because now they're a whole different mindset, a whole different set of people. So as the wagon approached and they got out the wagon and started walking toward the front porch, Micah and Lucas came out on the porch. And Lucas said, all right, what do you want now, Britt? And he said, the Crawford kid is sick. And yeah, I heard. Well, it's yellow fever, McCain. And he said, well, how do you know that? And he said, oh, I know. And it started here. And we're going to clean this place up. And Lucas said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, there's only one way to get rid of the fever. You got to burn it out. Now, I'll give you 2 minutes to get clear. Now, Lucas points his rifle at them and he says, and I'll give you just 1 minute to get off my property. So Mr. Bass, but it's the only way, Lucas. We'll make it up to you. We'll help you build another house. It'll be better. Well, Lucas said, no, I like this one just the way it is. And Bass says, but we've got to protect our wives and our families. Don't you understand? And Lucas said, I understand. And only one thing, that these people are sick and they need help. And Bass is like, yeah, but it's yellow fever. Now Micah, he cuts in and he says, it's still the need for help. Now just remember the time your store was wrecked in that tornado and Lucas and Carl, they pulled you out, even though they knew the roof might come down on them at any second? And how about the time you were bitten by that snake, Carl? Did Frank stop to think about that when he sucked that poison out of your leg? And how about who made all the effort to find that little girl who was lost in the blizzard? Every man went out to find her. Maybe all y'all need to take a think back a ways when you first came out here, depending on each other. See, people forget their own situation. They forget what it's like to be where these new people are. He said, you were all right back then because you knew you'd get back double. Well, that's why Lucas is helping these folks now, because they came out here fresh and new, and you're giving them a fine taste of what to expect. But now Britt, he's saying, well, that's real big talk, Marsha. That's what you do best. But words ain't going to keep us from getting the fever. Only this will. And he pointed to a torch that he was going to light. And Micah said, yeah, that's all you've got left, isn't it, Britt? What the war taught you. Violence, fire. Tell them the whole story. You're nothing without it. And so you just build it up to make yourself look big again. So Britt, he's mad. He turns to the men and he says, all right, men, come on, we're wasting time. Roy, you get the wagon and I'll get the house. But you know what? None of them moved. Did you hear me? He said. But nobody moved. And Mr. Bass said, no, Britt, no, this isn't the way. And Britt said, well, I'd say it is the way. Are you with me or are you not? And all the men turned and started walking back toward the wagon. And Britt was left standing there with the torch in his hand. So he saw he was defeated. So he dropped the torch and he walked away as well. He was the rotten apple, but he was no longer in the barrel. And Lucas even said to Micah, well, these are the folks I knew. So, long story short, the couple recovered, but they did ask Mark, did that boy have the fever? And he said, well, it wasn't yellow fever. You might want to call it green fever, because he was eating too many green apples. And he was afraid to tell his father, because he was doing something he had no business. So the moral of the story is, don't be so easily dissuaded by the words of another person. I mean, the neighbors in town, people had known Lucas for years. They had to be reminded of their hardships, everything they'd been through, all that he'd helped them with. How many times had Lucas been there for them? How quickly they forget, because they get caught up. And sometimes we do. We lose sight of our priorities. We forget what's really important. And one of the main things is get all the facts. You ever notice how many times people do stuff and they'll say, how do you know? We had a lesson on how do you know. They didn't even wait to see what the doctor said. Nobody even thought to ask, because they were too caught up listening to Britt and the other guy. You can't be that anxious to wreak havoc and create harm. And we see that so much in our everyday lives. And this is where you've got to be careful, just like Judas Iscariot. He thought they were befriending him. They only wanted to kill Jesus. He couldn't see it because he couldn't see beyond the surface. So don't be anxious. Get all the facts, not part of them. Don't just take what somebody says as the gospel, so to speak. And my closing words for today are, don't choose to be the rotten apple that spoils the bunch. And until next week, I'm Lelia Lewis. Thanks for joining me.